Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Bankrupt Hippo YouTube channel. I'm Bryce, and this is another episode of The Handmaid's Tale Talk. For this episode, we're going to talk about Season 4, Episode 5, which is Chicago. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe for more Handmaid's Tale content and also other movies, video games, and even women's soccer related stuff too. I talk about all that good stuff too. Alright, so let's get right into the episode. Basically, in this episode, we explore two different paths. I like to do these talks by going through each one separately because to me, it's just a lot less confusing than trying to go through the whole episode chronologically because I think the episodes jump around a lot. But nonetheless, the two avenues we're going to explore for this episode is going to be the avenue of Gilead and the avenue of Chicago. So we'll start off with what I think is the lesser of the two interesting avenues. First, we'll start off with Gilead. So basically, in this episode, Commander Lawrence approaches the council and says, "Hey, I want to propose a ceasefire on all of our contested fronts, which include Chicago, Texas, and I think he said one other place. I can't remember off the top of my head what it was. I'd have to go back and check. But anyways, the reason being he proposes this ceasefire to the Council of Gilead is because of the fact that he says, hey, you can't win wars just with bullets. You have to be a little bit more strategic. We need money. We need economic needs in order to keep up the fight. And basically, the council basically shits on that proposal. They think it's interesting, but they're like, no, we can crush our enemies. We have a really strong military. And that's one thing that they make pretty clear in this episode is that they have a very strong military, but I'll touch on that in just a little bit. So basically, like I said, Council tells him no, and then Commander Lawrence in private basically tells Nick, hey, just so you know, June might be in one of those contested areas, Chicago included, so you might want to rethink what you're saying. And Nick's like, look, if June was in one of those areas, I'd know about it. And then he's like, all right, we'll see. Well, Nick follows up on that, and Nick actually does find out that June is, in fact, in Chicago. So he goes up to Commander Lawrence and tells him, hey, I'll support you in whatever you need because you don't want to keep up a war going where the person you love is obviously occupying, right? So that makes for some really, really interesting stuff going forward. But meanwhile, while all of this is going on, we actually get a glimpse back in Aunt Lydia. And Aunt Lydia is still recovering from her injuries. You can tell that her facial scars have healed, her bruising's healed. She is pretty much back in full health. In fact, when we see her, she's like walking on the treadmill, just kind of looking outside and observing, and she sees the next, what she calls, class of handmaids um, being, I guess, talked to by their aunt for doing whatever it is that they do. But in the middle of this, she's actually interrupted by another aunt, one who is, I believe, of superior ranking, and she basically tells her, "Hey, you're no longer going to be taking charge of any handmaids." And this really crushes Aunt Lydia because it's what she lives for. You know, it's something that she has proven time and time and again in this episode that she lives to basically, for lack of a better term, train and guide handmaids. So she'll do anything she can to retain that post. And this kind of harks back a little bit to our conversation from last week's episode, where I posed the question: will Aunt Lydia ever change her mind about Gilead? Will her mind and her set of thinking ever shift back to what it was like pre-Gilead? And I think this is evidence to that she never will. I think she truly believes in what Gilead is doing and what she is doing, so I don't think we'll ever see her character really change in that respect throughout the episode. But I just wanted to touch on that a little bit before moving on within this episode. So I don't think she'll change very much on her stance on that. So just keep that in mind going forward. So basically, she'll do anything to get back her post. So what does she do? She goes to Commander Lawrence first and she blackmails him. She basically says, "Hey, I have a lot of dirt on you and I can make life very difficult for you. So I want you to reinstate me right now." And Commander Lawrence is like, "Oh, you're going to have to do better than that. What other dirt do you have on all of the other commanders?" Because of the fact of this, Commander Lawrence, in order to get his ceasefire, would be, and have more power in general, would be much better suited if he were actually on the council because he'd have a lot more say in what's going on. And Aunt Lydia would also benefit from that because if he has more say on the council, he can reinstate Aunt Lydia immediately. And since he's on the council, nobody's going to say anything otherwise. So he basically proposes, hey, Aunt Lydia, why don't we team up? Because I know you have dirt on the other commanders on the council. And if we use that, I get what I want and you get what you want. And then Aunt Lydia says, okay, fine, but on one condition, we get June back here and I get to discipline her. And then he says, Yeah, that's fine with me. And I'm like, wow, holy shit. Okay, so now they're gonna team up and blackmail basically all the other commanders on the council. And plus, for Commander Lawrence to say, I could live with that, to Aunt Lydia wanting June back to discipline her, it makes me wonder about him as a character again, because when June was escaping, um, or I'm sorry, helping all of the other Martha's children and handmaids escape, he seemed very hellbent on cleaning up his mess, as he put it, and I think this is just more evidence of the contrary. I don't know if he actually meant what he said when he said that or not, but I guess we'll have to kind of keep that in mind and stay tuned to find out. But anyways, um, I think it Commander Lawrence is kind of like going back to his old ways of being in the strength of Gilead, and I have a small theory and small caveat on this that it makes me wonder. It's like, okay, is he going back to his old ways? Was all that stuff he told June just bullshit? Or is he actually trying to get to the very top of Gilead in order to just tear it all down one day? Because if he can, for lack of a better term, infiltrate the council and then become, for lack of a better term, the head, the leader of Gilead, he could hypothetically change everything and tear it back down again to ashes and return the world to what its normal state was like before Gilead. So I don't, with what he's been doing, I don't think that my theory is going to be correct, but I can dream, can I? And I guess we'll have to stay in tune to find out throughout the other episodes. But it'd be a really fascinating strategy if my theory were correct. So I guess we'll have to wait and find out. But anyways, so Commander Lawrence is now, they go through with their plan. Aunt Lydia blackmails the other commanders. Commander Lawrence is now on the council. He gets what he wants, and Nick basically, he tells the council in one of their meetings, "Hey, I want to revisit the ceasefire because now that he knows that June is in Chicago, he's kind of rethinking his situation. Like I mentioned earlier before we trailed off Aunt Lydia, he tells Commander Lawrence, I'll support you whenever you need. Well, Nick is getting ready right now to have the conversation and support Commander Lawrence, but then as soon as he brings it up, all the commanders are like, oh yeah, we totally support it now. And Nick's kind of like, wait, you guys were so opposed not too long ago. What changed? And they say, oh yeah, we forgot to tell you. And Commander Lawrence is at this table at the same token, that showing us as the audience that he's now on the council. And he's like, oh yeah, we forgot to tell you. Right before the ceasefire, you're going to coordinate an attack and you're going to bomb the living hell out of all these different contested areas. And then we're going to send in aid to help everybody out. So basically, what happened is Commander Lawrence is now double crossed Nick, and now Nick has to basically coordinate a large mass scale bombing where June is currently occupied. So very interesting to see what the follow up between Nick and Commander Lawrence is going to be for the next few episodes, because of the fact that it's like, okay, to me, they're on the same team. Nick saved Commander Lawrence's ass in the very first episode when convincing the council to bring him in as a consultant, and now he's kind of stomping on that, which I think is a really questionable move and idea, but I'm curious to see how the show is going to play out that situation in particular. But there's a very, I think this particular moment is very telling of Gilead's philosophy, because, like I said, they're going to do this bombing and then they're going to send in aid immediately after. So, what they're doing is they're doing the strategy where they hurt their enemies and they heal them. They hurt their enemies and they heal them. And this is going to sound a little morbid, but to me, it's a really fascinating tactic to use on your enemies. I don't know if you guys, just stay with me on this for a second here, but I think that if any of you have ever read the book by George Orwell, 1984, there's moments in there where they talk about when you use this strategy of you hurt your enemies and then you heal them. You hurt them, you heal them. You hurt them, you heal them. You start to develop this cadence in the situation you're in against your enemies where you're showing that you have control over them in whatever situation you're in, and in a really weird way it makes your enemies develop a sort of love for you, which I think is just, there's a psychological phenomenon there that's really fascinating that I think Gilead is using. I'm not knowledgeable enough on it in particular to give you more details, but I think that the fact that Gilead is using this is very interesting. Like I said, it sounds morbid as hell, but it's just weird that they would use this tactic, and there must be a reason that they're doing it. So it's like, are they trying in a weird way to get enemies on their side? Are they just trying to show their power over them? Because either way, this option would might work, and it's really scary because one, like I mentioned earlier, they make clear in this episode that Gilead's military is extremely powerful, and two, what does that mean for the larger world of the Handmaid's Tale? Like, is Gilead just going to keep growing? Will the rest of the world have to step in and stop Gilead from what they're doing? What? How does the rest of the world, besides Canada, feel about this whole situation? Because sooner or later, it could probably start a world war, but I'd be fascinated to see how further episodes get into that. I think this is what this is all leading to, but we'll have to excuse me, stay in tune to find out. So, really, really fascinating stuff, but that pretty much does it for going through the Gilead avenue of this episode. Now we got to cut back into Chicago and June and Janine's situation. So, basically, to start off in this episode, June is daydreaming, night dreaming. I can't really quite tell from the episode, but she's daydreaming about when her and Luke first started getting together, and she's starting to dream about him. And I think that's just kind of showing us as the audience, like, hey, she's still thinking about Luke, like Luke hasn't left her mind. So again, just kind of going back to the whole love triangle thing between Luke, Nick, and June to see how that's going to play out by the end of the series. But I just thought that was a very interesting small little footnote in the episode. That's really the only thing they address with Luke at all. But anyways, we see Janine and Steven. Steven is the leader of this group that they've now kind of met up with, and they start to form a bit of a love connection, which is really interesting. In a world like Gilead where we really don't see a lot of genuine love connections like that form, it's kind of refreshing to see that start to develop and unfold before us. So I just thought it was kind of oddly nice, I guess. Like I said, in the world of The Handmaid's Tale, not very many positives come out of that, and I just thought that was a nice little positive that the episode threw into there. But there's definitely reasons for it. I'll touch on that in just a second. But anyways, in this episode, you can kind of tell June is craving to fight. June wants to be part of a rebellion that makes a difference, like by literally fighting. They allude to it several times. The first of which is, like I said at the very beginning, she wakes up and she hears bombings going on outside, like night raids, things like that. That's pretty normal in war. And instead of June like cowering or trying to hide from it, she actually gets a lamp, calmly walks up to the what I think is the top floors of the building, and just watches the fight go on, like without even batting an eye. And then fast forward a little bit more, the show keeps putting in these subtle moments of June actually like staring at weapons and guns and things like that. I believe they do it two or three times. And they do it very, the camera work on this is very, very solid. And I think the show subtly tells us this very well. It just shows June just stopping, looking, and then the camera kind of pans to the weapons, just fixates on it for a few seconds. And then I think it really nicely gets that message across, like, hey, June, her mind is on the fight above anything else without beating us over the head with it. I think they might take it a little bit too far by the end of the episode, but then again, they still get the point across without, I think, going too overboard with it. And I thought that was really interesting, and it shows us as the audience where June's mind is at overall. And this is evidenced even further. Like I said, they still kind of pursue that a little bit more because June actually asks Steven to help them with their trade, to actually go from place to place to conduct trade in dangerous areas because, like I said, June wants to be part of the fight. Well, Steven agrees with the help of Janine because, like I said earlier, Steven and Janine have a love connection. Janine vouches for June, and they all go on this mission together to go trade some supplies. Well, along the way, June actually gets a glimpse of two Gilead soldiers lying on the ground, and they're burnt to a crisp. Like they are, like you could tell they were burnt from whatever fight they were in. But instead of June does something really interesting in the scene. Instead of like being mortified by like the sight of two burnt soldiers, June actually like gets closer and like looks at their badge, like the Gilead patch on their shoulder, and like starts like touching it. And again, I think it's just showing us June is not shying away from the fight. She is ready for the fight. And they take this even further. And Steven says, "Oh yeah, Nighthawks probably did this. They're basically a rebellion group that all they do is kill soldiers. June, you'd love them." So again, subtly telling us, hey, June is looking for the fight. So um, they keep going on their journey to go trade these supplies. Well, they run into a Gilead patrol, and they've obviously got to hide because they could get gunned down and killed. And June and Janine aren't even armed at this point, so they're basically hiding. And while they're hiding, June tells Steven, hey, we can take them, like start returning fire. And then Steven says, hey, shut the hell up, keep hiding. Well, after the Gilead patrol leaves, June tells Steven, why didn't you take them? Like, we could have won the fight. And then Steven brings up a really interesting point that reveals a few things. He says, okay, that's great. We probably could, but what happens when they don't return to their post? Well, more patrols come around. It makes it harder to move around and makes it harder to trade supplies. So I think this particular moment, this particular scene shows a few things. One, June, again, like I've said, like probably 3 or 4 times already, she wants the fight, and there's no stopping her. That's all that's on her mind. Two, it also shows her recklessness a little bit. June is so focused on just killing Gilead soldiers that um she's kind of forgetting the other logistics that go into it. But Steven, as a leader of, I guess, a pseudo militaristic group, I would basically more call them a nomad group than anything. He points out that it's not that simple to just point, aim, and fire in order to win things like this. You have to be strategic. You have to think in the grander scheme of things in order to win these fights, because winning in the micro doesn't necessarily mean winning in the macro. There's other implications that go on. And I think it exposes June's lack of knowledge in being well versed in militaristic style things. And I just thought it was really interesting because it's like June is an exceptional leader. She shows this that many times, but it also shows she's not quite ready to be a militant in this rebellion just yet. She needs a little bit more help in that aspect. So we'll see how that ends up turning out. But I think the third thing is, I already kind of touched on this a little bit, is that Steven's group is more of a survival group, less so than a rebellion group. They're not there to win fights at all costs. They're there to essentially survive, which is why I think they're more of a nomad group than anything, the less of a militaristic group. I think the Nighthawks that they allude to would probably suit June's needs a little bit more into just wanting to fight to win the fight at all costs. And it shows that there's a misalignment between a lot of these groups in these contested territories, is that not all of them are resistance. Like, it's not black and white like June thinks it is. Some of them are just trying to survive, some of them are trying to win a war and fight, and not all of them are aligned to the same thing. I think that's very eye-opening for June, and it basically leads her to the conclusion, okay, if I'm gonna do what I want to do, this isn't the group that I need to be with. I need to go be with the Nighthawks. So she basically finds out from somebody else at the camp named Brad. I'm not going to talk about Brad too much because I think he's a footnote in this episode. I guess time will tell. But she basically befriends this guy named Brad. He gives her information on where to find the Nighthawks, and she tells Janine, "Hey, I'm out of here. I'm leaving. Let's go." And Janine says, "Hang on a second. Wait. You're leaving, but what if I want to stay?" And June basically tells Janine, like, you're crazy. And Janine's like, well, what if I've basically fallen in love with Steven? What if I want to stay here and just live a life? And June's like, well, Janine, he's just using you and all that other good stuff. And they basically hash out another conversation like in last episode, where they're throwing jabs at each other. They're throwing some of them are haymakers, because some of the things they say to each other are absolutely crazy. You guys, if you've seen the episode, know what I'm talking about. But um, the content of the conversation isn't too important, but I look at these conversations between June and Janine as basically moments of character growth between them. You have hard knocks between two people that love each other. I would say June and Janine, after all they've been through, they love each other, and they they've these conversations form stronger bonds between the two. And I think that's what the episode is really showing us, is that by them having these harder conversations, it shows that they're stronger than what we even think that they might be as the audience. So I think it's an interesting little dynamic, and it very much reminds me of a mother daughter dynamic. June being the mother, Janine being the daughter, where June is just trying to do her best because she's so used to looking after so many people that she's just trying to help people survive. She wants them to grow. She doesn't want to see them get hurt. And Janine is kind of like the daughter in this situation, where she's like, I understand that and I love you for it, but at the end of the day, I want to make my own decisions and go out on my own. I want to be independent and leave the nest, as it were. So really, really interesting dynamic, and also character growth overall. So they have their feud, they go their separate ways, and June is leaving, and Janine says, goodbye, I'm staying here. That's that. My decision's final. And so Janoon, June ends up leaving on her merry way. Well, actually, about 2 minutes later in the episode, and this is very interesting choice, I think, for the show. 2 minutes later, June thinks that she hears somebody like behind her, so she hides, and it's just Janine catching up with her. And Janine says, "You know, I just want to be with you. You know, handmaids always walk in pairs," and so they just go on their merry way. Which I'll talk about the implications about that in just a second. But anyways, keeping on going, they get to a Gilead checkpoint, and both of them are really puzzled because there's no soldiers around at all. There's like no one around, and they even notice that like food it was left on tables, and they're like, "Oh my god, they even left the food here! Like, why would they do that?" And June obviously is noticing that something's wrong. Well, as she's figuring out and piecing together something's wrong, what appears but fighter planes overhead coming to bomb Chicago. Because, like I mentioned earlier, all of the Commander Council agreed to a bombing before they did their ceasefire, and now that's coming to fruition, and now the streets are getting bombed as June and Janine are sitting there in the middle of it. And basically, they get bombed, and they both get knocked unconscious. At least I think they both get knocked unconscious. And June wakes up, running around looking for Janine, and it, I'm gonna be really disappointed. I'm just gonna say this. I'm gonna be really disappointed if Janine died as a result of those bombings. I think that would be a very, very disappointing thing, at least for me as an audience member, me personally, in this episode, because what I think it would have been a much more fitting ending for Janine's character. If they were just going to end Janine's character overall, I think it would have been much more fitting and much more suitable for the show if Janine did die in that bombing, if she would have just stayed with Steven and that group and just started a new chapter in her life and just went about her merry way, because it would have shown Janine's character growth of being independent, wanting to live her own life in the way that she envisions it. And it would have fit her character a lot more to stay with Steven in that respect because she could have started that chapter of her life. But instead, if she chose to go with June and just died 5 minutes later. One, it's a waste, I think, of a lot of potential buildup that they've had for Janine going going through this season so far, and it would just make for more weight on June's shoulders that she frankly doesn't need. Like she's already had to deal with the death of a lot of her friends that were handmaids, Alma and I can't remember her name. Those two that died on the train. All the people that helped her craft the plan for all the Marthas to handmaids and children escape. All those people who died, and it'd just be another person to add to June's list that has paid the price for whatever decisions she's made. And I just think that the show has kind of beaten that to death. So if Janine did in fact die in the bombings, because they don't reveal it explicitly in this episode, I think that would be a very bad move for the show in general, and I think it'd have been um a much more organic and natural approach if Janine just stayed with them. But like I said, that is with the caveat that Janine died in the bombings. If she didn't die in the bombings, well then fine, it's all good, all is forgiven. But I just wanted to touch on that a little bit because I'm really curious in the next episode to see what exactly happened to Janine. And if they did kill her off in this episode, I think it'd actually be a big indicator that the whole series in general is starting to come to a close. In fact, I already think after season 5 the show will end, but that's a whole nother bag of tricks altogether. But if it shows if you're getting rid of main characters that the show's probably coming to a natural conclusion. So we'll have to see on that. This is all, like I said, this is all with the caveat that Janine did die in the bombings. If Janine is still alive, then it throws a lot of this out the window. But anyways, June is walking around looking for Janine. She doesn't find her at all, but who does she run into while all of these 8 officers are running around? Because remember, right after the bombings, a 24-hour ceasefire ensues, and a lot of these contested areas now get aid and healthcare and all that other stuff. Who appears as one of those 8 officers but Moira, who runs right into June in the middle of Chicago, and then bam, the episode ends. And I'm just like, holy shit. I wasn't expecting that at all. I'm trying to remember in the last couple episodes if Moira even mentioned that she was going to be traveling from Canada to Chicago to help with any aid that was going on. I don't think they revealed that in previous episodes because of the fact that they didn't announce the ceasefire till this particular episode, so this is just a total surprise out of left field. I think it fits Moira's character perfectly to be there in that moment in time, so I totally bought the situation and it blew me away. But wow, Moira and June get to see each other again after many seasons of never seeing each other, so I'm really curious to see what's going to go down in episodes 6 and 7. So I have to say, what has been a very quiet season up to this point, in this episode really picked up for me a lot. I think what I overall think of this episode is I thought it was a great episode, and the way that it ended I thought was very intriguing, exciting. It's got me super pumped for the next few episodes going forward too. So I think that a lot of the buildup that this series has done for this season is now starting to come to fruition. Us as the audience are getting to reap the benefits. So I think this season picked up tremendously in this episode, and I absolutely loved it. Things I'm looking for next episode: what's going to happen with June? What happened with Janine? Did she die in the bombings? And also, what's going to happen between Commander Lawrence and Commander Blaine, which is Nick, for those of you guys who don't know. But how is that all going to pan out? So a lot to look forward to in the next episode, and I can't wait to find out what the larger implications are going to be. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for this episode of The Handmaid's Tale Talk for Season 4, Episode 5, titled Chicago. What did you guys make of the episode? What did you think about any of my theories? Whatever you think, feel free to jump down in the comments below and let me know. So, that'll do it. Like I said, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, or listen to the podcast. I'll link all that down in the description below. I truly greatly appreciate you guys coming by and talking Handmaid's Tale with me. I've been Bryce. This has been the Bankrupt Hippo YouTube channel. And until next time, have a great day.